A reading from St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13, beginning to read at verse 31. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. It struck me when I read today's Gospel that Jesus uses some examples to describe the kingdom of heaven that really fit lockdown rather well. Some of our young church group gathered via Zoom on Sunday, following the streamed service, and Izzy showed us a wonderful courgette plant that she had planted from seed and which was well into flower. People have been growing all sorts of things from seed. I've got basil plants galore, but I wonder if anyone has sown a mustard seed. And then, among my phone conversations in the parish, I've come across some very productive bakers. Rachel McPhail, for example, who has made bread for her hungry family all the way through lockdown, and is a complete expert on mixing in the yeast with the flour and waiting until all of it is leavened. I'm sure when Jesus was speaking, he was thinking of the wonderful way that a tiny seed once planted can grow and flourish into something beautiful and beneficial, quite beyond what its tininess and fragility might suggest. But I expect he was also thinking of the patience that is involved, the watching and the waiting and the nurturing, making sure the conditions are right, enough light, enough water, and soil that suits. Similarly with the yeast, a tiny amount can ensure that the dough will rise, but you can't rush it. You have to be patient and wait. And if it isn't in the right sort of temperature and it is too cold, well, the wonderful growth into loaf size just won't happen, as I know all too well. Father Bob was speaking on Sunday at the service about the phases of the church's year and how this time between Ascension and Pentecost is a time of watching and waiting for the Holy Spirit. We recall how the disciples watched and waited and prayed together as Jesus had asked them to do before he ascended, and as they trusted in what he had promised without knowing quite how it was going to be. They had no certainty about how and when the Spirit was going to come upon them, but were open to it and ready to trust in it. And if you think about all that hidden work of the Spirit, work that was to take them from the small beginnings of their first tentative following of Jesus to them becoming his apostles, sent out to build his kingdom far and wide, then those images of the kingdom that Jesus gave us make sense. We are all, in a sense, in watching and waiting mode in all the uncertainty of the current times. Uncertain of how to proceed, uncertain of what lies ahead. We know the Holy Spirit will be at work in hidden and wonderful ways, and we can see the effects of that in all the loving kindness and courage and inspiration that we see around us. But we know too that being open to the Holy Spirit does require prayer and patience and trust. We don't always have confidence, and we don't always see the way forwards. We need the support and encouragement of others as together we try to work for God's kingdom. We need that especially when the path ahead is very unclear. I was interested to read more detail about Augustine, the saint that we celebrate today, the Augustine who became the first Archbishop of Canterbury at the very end of the 6th century. Having been asked by Pope Gregory the Great to take a group of 40 monks to England to preach to the heathen English, he set off from Rome. Somewhere in what is now France, he left his companions to wait for him, while he journeyed all the way back to Rome to tell the Pope of the qualms they were all having about the mission he had sent them on, and to ask for his advice. I don't know the detail of what the Pope said to him, but I do know that Augustine returned to the waiting group armed with a letter of encouragement and then led the mission on to England, landing in Thanet in Kent in 597. His monks took over an ancient Roman church called St. Martin in the city of Canterbury and established a pattern of prayer based on the rule of St. Benedict. And once King Ethelbert asked to be instructed in the faith, the growth of Christianity in the south of England was well on its way. But it was that detail of how tentative Augustine was, and of how he and his fellow monks needed that extra encouragement, that spoke to me. Augustine is referred to in today's collect prayer as God's servant, sent as the apostle of the English people, and his work described as labouring in the Spirit, just as those first disciples laboured in the Spirit as they spread the good news of the gospel following Pentecost. It is that same Spirit that we pray for as we seek to work together and to encourage and support one another in sharing the blessings of God's kingdom in times when the path ahead isn't exactly clear. May God bless you and keep you. Amen.